Deryck and Kevin.
What a night. Let's keep it going. This is just like the coolest way. When we first heard about this book, we could have probably never imagined that we'd be here in this room with you, Deryck. And we just want to thank you off the bat for doing this. This is so cool.
Cool, no, thank you guys for coming.
So everyone's got their copies, right?
Yeah.
Now, that is like the best 260 some odd pages. I mean, I don't know if anybody didn't do their summer reading as a kid. I hated reading. This has made me a book lover there. Seriously, I've read the book, and I also listened to the audiobook, which I highly encourage. I almost never say that because, you know, it sounds redundant. The audiobook is also so cool, so check that out too, guys, where you'll talk about a song in the audiobook, Deryck, and then the song will play. Deryck does some, no spoilers, does some amazing impressions.
I haven't heard them. I mean, obviously I did them, and I hope they turned out well, but I couldn't listen to them back.
Well, when I saw Deryck today for the first time, and this is the one spoiler I'll offer the book, is I said, man, I got so many questions for you tonight, but just, sort of behind the scenes thing I got to ask you about is who did the Iggy Pop voice in the book? There's an Iggy Pop voice in the audiobook, and you told me it was you.
Yeah. I attempted it.
It was pretty incredible. So let's just start at square one.
Well, first I will say, it's Iggy Pop at his age now. That's what I'm interested.
There's some method acting involved, it sounds like. But there's been so much going on in the world of Sum 41. Of course, Heaven and Hell. Congratulations, by the way, on the success of Heaven and Hell. Just incredible. I mean, you want to talk about a walk-on home run to a career. You know what I mean? It's pretty crazy. But there's that. There's the final tour. There's the big final goodbye. And then there's this book in the middle of it all. So kind of take us back to square one. When did you first have the idea to write a book?
I think the ideas come up over, I don't know how many years, maybe 7 years or so, that I've been approached, or the ideas come up, and I always kind of thought, like, I don't know, my story is kind of boring, you know? It's like I didn't really think there was anything there, and I kind of pushed the idea off, and I thought maybe it's something I'll do down the line. But then as we were coming to the idea of making this the last record, the last tour, it made sense to do this and kind of wrap this whole chapter of my life up at the same time, because it would feel weird to do all this stuff with Sum 41 and then 5 years down the road go back and revisit everything. To me, it felt like, let's just do it all at one time.
Yeah. So that was the initial hesitation, right? Like, what's so interesting about me, right?
Yeah.
Was there like a second wave of hesitation once you started writing the book and having to talk about, topics that may be difficult or personal or vulnerable?
Well, when I first started, I didn't know what I was going to write. I didn't necessarily have a list of stories that I thought, okay, I'll talk about that or this. It was just like, I got to page one, I go, okay, what do I do? I don't know, like, how do I start this thing? And then, and I was also thinking about, because I read a lot of these books, like, going back to say, like, Motley Crue, The Dirt, and like Ozzy's book, or Slash's book, or David Grohl's book, or whatever, like, I kind of read them all, and I kept thinking, I don't have anything on these guys. Like, my story is so boring. I'm just like a guy who wrote some songs, had a little bit of success, and I'm here, and, but then that kind of freaked me out, because I thought, you know what, like, who cares about all that stuff? Like, I made one rule for myself right from the beginning was, don't try to make yourself sound cool. Just write the fucking story. And if it's boring, it's boring. Yeah. It is what it is. And so once I said that to myself, everything just kind of poured out all of a sudden.
Did you find like that pep talk you told yourself ahead of writing something like a memoir, an autobiography? Was it at all similar to writing music and sort of speak from the heart? Did you find anything like a parallel there?
I did, in certain ways, because I've always written songs about my life or certain things, but that I've either observed or been through. But you only get like 2.5 minutes in a punk rock song, and it's not so literal. A lot of times it's a little bit vague. Sometimes it's literal, but you have to rhyme on every line. So you're kind of confined to somewhat of a certain structure, whereas a book, you could just kind of write the story, write about things, write how you felt about things. And I think that was the thing that was exciting to me was to talk about what I was going through or what I was thinking about while writing those songs, instead of just talking about what those songs are about, because sometimes like what I was going through doesn't necessarily mean that's what I wrote about. You know, there's stuff going on in the background that you don't even like, you don't ever talk about. And then you go to the studio, you go to work, but you went through some stuff that day that just is in the dark to most people.
Now, I'm so curious hearing you say that and having read the book. Do you think about any of your work differently now, having had to write about it and reflect on it? Are there any songs that come to mind, or writing processes, or even just periods of time through the long history of the band that you now view a little differently, having sort of deconstructed it for the book?
Not necessarily. I think part of the reason why I felt once I started writing the book, it kind of came out quickly, is because I remember everything really well, and it all feels like it was just yesterday. Like nothing feels that long ago. So I didn't really necessarily discover new things that I didn't know about myself. It's like it's all kind of there, you know. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like I said, I just remember everything so well. Like it feels like it was just yesterday.
Well, and I think I'm so grateful, and you guys will be too once you pour over this book, that you do have that amazing memory, because it really does fuel just the vivid storytelling that you take us through in this book. And just kind of going along the same lines now, I'm thinking about, you know, you detail these writing processes and these journeys of these famous records we grew up with and loved, working with people like Jerry Finn, of course. Is there a Jerry Finn in the world of literature? Like, how does the writing process, like, compare? Of course, there's probably less strip clubs than with Jerry, which you guys can read about. But
you'll get there.
But is there somebody like that? Like, who's like the producer when you're working on a book like this?
Not necessarily. I think because I do read a lot of these books, I felt like, in the same way when we were starting out as a band, you put on the show that you wish you could see, right? You'll see other bands and you go, why aren't they doing that on stage? Why don't they do? You can pick that apart. So I think when I went to write a book, I wrote a book that I always wanted to read. I wished that when I was reading certain books, I'd feel like some of the books would really go there in certain spots, and then you'd feel the author pulling back, or you kind of want a little bit more, but they don't give it, you know, stuff like that. So I just felt when I was doing it, I was going to write the book that I wish to read.
Yeah, you definitely, like, you left it all out there. It's just such a beautiful and powerful read. And then the editing process, I'm curious to ask you about, because I think you did the most, just the coolest thing for longtime fans is, has anyone seen the video podcast?
Yes.
Yeah.
How awesome is that? Like, oh my God, I look forward to that every single week when that drops and I see it on the Twitter. But the things that didn't make the book, you of course were generous enough to share with the video podcast. So was that kind of a difficult process of like what is in the book and what will wind up on the podcast?
Yeah, so when the book was finished, I started remembering all these things that didn't make it into the book, and I was thinking, how did I even leave that story out? And I started to realize, well, those stories don't necessarily, they're not part of the journey, right? They're not, like, losing a bag of blow at Ozzy Osbourne's house isn't how I wrote the song. It was like after I wrote the song. So it's not part of the journey. So I had all these stories, and I thought, well, what do? I mean, do I write another book of just like wild stories, but they don't connect? I just thought that was kind of weird, and I thought, well, you know, maybe I came up with this idea of doing these video podcasts. Like, it's like a video book. It's like a whole book, but in video form, once a week, and it lets you know that there's an actual book coming out too.
I got very excited. I don't know if you guys had this experience too, but I got even more excited for the book when I watched the video podcast and I heard that the Kelly Osbourne unwritten law hotel room in DC story didn't make the book, and I was like, if this didn't make the book, this is going to be an incredible read.
Yeah, I mean, there are stories like that that were just, like I said, more part of what was going on at the time. Like, we were just touching on with Jerry Finn. Like, those days, making an All Killer No Filler album with Jerry Finn was like that every single day. And we were just, 18, 19 years old, and we just signed a record deal, and they gave us all this money to go make a record. And we were like, we just spent it on strip clubs and partying and, doing stuff that you do when you're a teenager. Well, at least what we did in Toronto. I don't know. We do over here.
So you talk about your early life, of course, growing up with your mom, and your mom's boyfriend when you were very young, BD, who you talk about.
They get married, yeah.
They did eventually get married, and you talk about it in the book, which story I never heard, is that there was maybe there was some confusion when you were a child as to you assumed BD, you were so young, was your biological father, and then having to go through the process, as you write in the book, of finding out he wasn't. How did that affect you as a kid?
You know, at the time I was really excited because he wasn't a very nice guy. So when I found out he wasn't actually my father, I shared no genes with him, I was actually happy, even though I was pretty young. But I had such a great relationship with my mom, and still do, and she kind of like filled all those roles for me already, that it just was like, okay, great, he's not my dad, let's move on. And it was just her and I for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, so like I said, when he was out of the picture, life got a lot better.
Yeah. And can we just get a round of applause very quickly? Talk to us, if you could, just about how much your mom has meant to you throughout your entire life, and of course, throughout this book.
Well, the thing is, she had me when she was young. She just turned 17 when I was born, and she dropped out of school. She was 10th grade, and it was just her and I for a little bit, and then she met this dude who was not that cool. They got married for a bit of time, and then by the time I was, 7 or 8, he was out of the picture. And then it just became her and I, and, you know, it was, at that point, she knew that she had to kind of like make her way in the world, right? And she was only in her mid-20s. And, you know, when you're young, and your mom, no matter how young she is, she's old, right? So I didn't know she was young. But she had to go back to high school to get her high school diploma, and she was working the days and going to school at nights, and, you know, it was a hard struggle for her. And I just didn't realize it at the time because I was so young. And as I got older, I started to realize like how much she had on her plate, how much she had to do. And eventually, you know, she became a nurse, and she went to nursing school and got a good job and ended up marrying somebody else, and blah, blah, blah. But that's all in the book. I don't want to give too much away.
And one of the things you detail in the book, of course, your mom was always playing music in the house.
Yeah.
And it's very cool to read about your earliest influences. But then once, and we've all gone through this. I mean, the irony of talking about your first, the type of music you fall in love with when you're 12, 13 years old is, for most people in this room, me included, that's your band for us. And so for you, though, at that time, it was really hip-hop, and that struck me. Of course, that's definitely, especially on that first record, a huge part of the DNA that made you guys so unique was the hip-hop influence that you guys sort of brilliantly wove with the hard rock. But then eventually, somebody introduces you to heavy metal, and that sort of takes you away from hip-hop. What was it about heavy metal music and rock music that was so powerful it kind of stole your heart away?
I mean, it's a little hard to. I was pretty young, so I don't really know why. It's just something that speaks to you. I was having this conversation earlier today because I have 2 kids. One's 4, one's 1 year old, and both of them, when they were like 6 to 8 months, and they hear music, they'll start dancing. And we were talking about how they don't know the words, they don't know anything, they don't know chords, they don't know anything, but they will start moving to music. And in some songs, they won't. Like they already know it's something inside of you, right? That resonates. And it's really weird. As a musician, it's interesting because I don't even think we always think about we pick the music we like because we're adults and we like that song. We don't like that thing, but it's actually in us from such a young age that speaks to us, and I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I thought another thing that really struck me while reading the book is I have to imagine, talking about your experience, growing up and having to, navigate the BD situation, of course, and having to, dealing with abandonment issues and trying to find your identity. And then there's a part in the book where you write about how when you guys went into a professional studio for the first time, you felt, most people would just be so intimidated by that, and you felt really at home. Is that would you say maybe a landmark moment in your life where you felt like maybe you found that identity?
Well, to go back to what you were saying, I don't know if I really ever felt abandonment issue.
Okay.
I felt I think it does one of 2 things. You either get incredible abandonment issues when somebody leaves you, at that age, or you realize you don't need anybody, you know. And I feel like it was the latter for me. It was just, I'm not gonna depend. And also, like I said, like at that same time, I realized, you know, my mom had to start working very hard, and I saw her climb up, and we moved a lot, but every time we were moving, it was always getting a little bit better. So I think that taught me that you can't rely on anybody, and you have to make your own way, and it's a lot of hard fucking work.
Yeah, totally. And you also talk about in the book that same time period of your life. You're 13 years old. Your heroes, of course, Kurt Cobain's rock stars, right? And I'm just curious, like, what was it about, if you can think back to that time in your life, what was it about those people that you think, as a young man, really drew you to them?
Well, I don't know. I think, you know, when I think back to it at that young age, like my idols were, like you said, Kurt Cobain, Jim Morrison, Ferris Bueller. And I don't know. I think it was just that the Ferris Bueller thing is like, yeah, you know, just getting away with everything, fucking with all the powers that be, and somehow getting away with it, which is very much like being the singer of a rock band. So, and of course, you know, I mean, when Nirvana came out, that was like right at the age that I was discovering rock music for the first time. And like, what better band to bring you into rock music than Nirvana? So, I think that changed the whole world, not just my world. You know, it changed everything.
And you talk about in the book Casper, your first band.
So Casper was the band that basically became Sum 41. So when we were in 10th grade, you know, 15 years old, we were this band Casper. It was kind of like, at the time, so Weezer's Blue Album, Green Day's Dookie, Smashing Pumpkins' Siamese Dream, they're all like new records around that time, right? So we were kind of like as a mix of all those records for Casper. And at the same time, we fell in love with punk rock music, like bands like NoFX and Pennywise and that whole sort of Fat Records Epitaph kind of scene. And that's what we really listened to more. So we kind of just eventually morphed Casper into becoming Sum 41. It was the same members, same everything. We just kind of changed the name, stopped playing all those songs, started writing new songs. But it was the same guy.
And then have you publicly told the story, and maybe we don't want to tell it, maybe you should read it, of how you guys actually just sort of spur of the moment came up with the name Sum 41 that is now so
I think we should leave that in there.
Okay, that's a good tease. That's a good tease. I got a kick out of that though, reading that.
I didn't think it was that interesting, but glad you did.
But I got the biggest kick out of it. Well, you're also though you led a boring life and you lost a bag of Coke at Ozzy's. I don't think anyone should have done that. But you talk about that journey of forming the band, and do you want to talk at all about meeting the guys and just sort of what happened there?
Well, I can sort of wrap. I don't have to tell the whole story because it is in there, but
yeah.
I was just telling somebody today, somebody was asking me, like, you know, how's the tour going? And I'm like, it's great, but the funny thing that I realized the other day is that I'm still sitting next to Cone and Dave as I was in ninth grade, the first day of high school. We're still sitting next to each other.
Just letting that sink in, that's so incredible. And it's just such a testament to you.
Yeah, like we met in high school and we just happened to be sitting beside each other on the first day. And then, you know, the next class, you know, we'd already met and we're like, we move on to the next class and we become friends. And then year after year, we just keep sitting beside each other in all in history class, English class, you know, whatever it is. And I'm like, I'm still sitting next to you guys.
Are you like a meant to be kind of guy? Like when you reflect on that, how do you sort of process that? Like,
I'm definitely a meant to be person. And I'm also like, I just sort of let it be kind of person. I let things just kind of happen. I've come to realize, at least in my life, that when you really try to like work too hard at making something work out the way you want it, a lot of times it's not going to work out the way you want it. And then you're really setting yourself up for a lot of disappointment, because if you just let things happen, they have a way of working out, even when they don't. And again, this is how I feel for myself, that even like a year later, that thing that seemed so bad and went so sideways and wrong, and I was so upset by it, is actually better now. Like my life is better because it didn't work out. But at the time, it felt like the worst. So at this point in my life, I just roll with anything, whatever happens.
I was talking to you backstage about just the overwhelming takeaway is from this book is just your sort of remarkably consistent, the highs and the lows which you detail in the book of the band and your personal life. You do retain this very positive, happy disposition. And what do you think that is about you that you're able to do that through just everything you've faced in life?
I think part of it might be just the way my brain works. You know, I just kind of, I do enjoy waking up every morning, and I'm excited about the day, and I always have been. I've always hated going to sleep because I'm like, fuck, I'm like having too good of a time right now. I don't want to like go to bed. I got stuff that I want to do. So sometimes, a lot of times I'm like, fuck, I gotta go to bed so I can just wake up earlier and get back to what I want to do. But there's also, like I was saying, I've realized over time that things have a way of working out, even when you think they're not going to. I also will say that I almost welcome some of the hard things that happen. I don't like them while I'm in it, and there are a lot of ups and downs in here, but all those down moments, I always am so thankful that they happen after I've gotten out of it. I hate it while I'm in it. You know, it's brutal. And there are so many moments where when you're in those really low moments, you think, is this ever going to get any better? Will I ever get back to the way I was? Will life ever be as good as it was before? And it always seems to be better.
I mean, I'm curious because we all, have those moments where we stray from who we are, right? Did you ever, throughout your career in Sub 41, did you ever not do your best job of letting things be? Did you ever try to force things looking back at certain moments in Sub 41?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was, and there's a difference of like working hard, right? Because I believe in working hard, but when you try to, the way I look at it is, to put it simply, is like, you can't control the outcomes. You can only control your output. So I focus on working as hard as I can, doing what I can, but not trying to focus on what I'm going to get out of it. With this book, I was just like, I'm just going to write the best book I can write. I don't know if anyone's going to like it, read it, or whatever it's going to happen. That's out of my control. What's in my control is what's on those pages.
Well, one of the most sort of amazing periods of time in the history of your band that you detail in this book, and you talk about just letting things come to you and sort of, letting the universe align around you, is this incredible writing period that I think happens, if I have my time correct, like right after you sign the first major deal, and just these iconic songs that we know and love today are just pouring out of you like one after another. I believe it's Fat Lip and Make No Difference and In Too Deep. I mean, that was a pretty, please give it up. These songs were all now, of course, iconic. They all sort of were written, and you laugh when I say iconic. What is that about?
I don't know, I just don't associate that word with myself. Or my
You should!
It's just something that you say.
Right.
Not.
Well, it does
it's something that one would say because I'm sitting here.
Right. No, but I know it does sound cliche, and it sounds like a
No,
like
I
a
think
guy
it's
would
cliche.
say.
I just, I don't know. I just never associate that with anything that I do.
That's probably. Do you ever think that's like a secret to the sort of the healthy relationship you have with how successful you've been as a musician? Is you sort of you have that disassociation with it?
It's possible. I've always one thing, and I never really. I've noticed this about myself, but when you bring it up, I noticed that I've always. How do I say it right? I've never really felt like I've made it, if that makes any sense. Like I always feel like this next one's going to be the one, or this. I still have so much to do, so much to prove, so much I'm working for. So on every album, every song, everything that I ever work on, I've never felt like that I'm at a place that's like, at a certain level.
Yeah.
I always feel like I'm still down here looking up, trying to make it.
Well, and I think honestly that's how you make an album as great as Heaven and Hell this far into your career, is you have that mentality. Do you look back though, was there ever a moment, you're human at the end of the day, where you feel like you started, even if it was just for a little moment, to believe the hype a little bit, to believe, No,
we used to joke about this, like we would meet bands or just anybody who's had success, could be an actor or anything, and they have they walk around on this level like they're just so fucking good. and we would say, man, could I just have like a little bit of that? Like, I feel like my life would less torture myself if I could just have that, a little bit of that ego to think like, fuck yeah, I'm awesome. Thank you.
You think this guy following you around?
But the whole band, like we've all, and maybe it's because we're all just Canadian. I don't know what it is, or maybe it's
It honestly might be that.
we just have to live in this inferiority complex next to the U.S. all the time. So I don't know, the whole band has always felt like that. Like we've never walked around that we're like, we fucking made it, or like we're better than them. It's always the opposite.
I wasn't as versed in how like cool of customers these guys were, and me and the band were in LA 2-3 weeks ago, and I wanted to come up with like and you guys know how this is, a big fan of this guy. You want to come up with this like perfect, like heady, deep question about the lineage of Sum 41, and I thought about this like all day. It was probably a 2-minute question to open this interview in LA, and they were just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, it's gotta happen. But that's, I think, part of the genius of you as an artist, as an author, and of course as like the lead singer of this band.
Iconic, genius.
You'd really be in business if me and this guy followed you. But if you could, take us back to that period of time and these songs that really just poured out of you. I think it's really remarkable.
Okay, that's. I don't think they poured out of me at all. I think it was a lot of torture back then to try to get as many songs out. Especially once we signed the record deal. And it only got worse as time went on, because then once you had success, it was like, oh fuck, we gotta follow this up. And there was no time. It was just, we were putting out records so quickly. We put those first 4 albums out in 4 years. And we were on tour the whole time as well.
They were fucking epic though.
But yeah, I just felt like everyone was always like hounding you. Not everyone, but I mean, you know, we had management, we had a record company. Like the band guys didn't give a shit. You know, everyone was just hanging out partying, and those guys weren't bothering me. But other people were like, you know, have you finished any more songs yet? I'm like, I got like a verse. I'm still working on it. And it was like a day later, like, what do you got now? I'm like, I got one more line from yesterday. That's it. So it just felt like it was taking so long. But only in hindsight, when I look back and I say, we did those first 4 records in 4 years and on tour the whole time, like that's kind of crazy actually. But it felt like it was taking me so long to write songs because that's all I did. Like if there was any downtime, you know, when we were touring the van, I would always have the back bench of the van. I had a little recording system with me. I had my headphones and my guitar in the back while like Dave or Cone would drive, and I would just be writing songs in the back. Steve-O never drove. But no one wanted him to drive. That would be a disaster.
You did wind up in the front seat.
He was in the front
At
seat.
one point.
He was very good at moral support. He was good at staying up and keeping the drivers.
Would you say it's fair to say, and you'll read about this in the book, just a little tease, is Steve-O the only member of Sum 41 that ever wrote a song while on the toilet?
Yes, I believe so.
Great ideas come to you, I've heard. You talked a little bit there about you and the guitar, and I think that you have a lot of famous loves that you detail in this book, but that I think is a love that maybe gets under-talked about. I mean, you were just at Riot Fest not too long ago, and I heard you talking to somebody, and you were saying, you were in Chicago, and you went to, I think, the Chicago Music Exchange, and you were just like toying around with guitars, and that's one of the first big purchases you
I bought a
made.
guitar a couple hours ago.
Yeah.
Did you go somewhere in New Jersey City or New York?
No, I bought it online.
Oh, wow.
It's a present to myself for the book coming out. I was looking at it on the plane a couple days ago, and I was just like, no, I can't. And then the book came out, I go, yeah, I can. It's my present.
And do you still have the Gibson? I believe it was a Gibson model. Was that first big purchase when you got started?
Yeah, I still have that one. Yeah.
Wow. And did that guitar ever, like, would we know that guitar from any famous songs you've written?
Well, I wrote a lot of songs with it around like Half Hour Power and Even All Killer, but it's in the Makes No Difference video. That's the guitar I used in that video shoot.
That's amazing. That's
really
cool.
Like technique.
And what is it about guitars, like in terms of just like?
You know, I always think about that because I'm not that good of a guitar player. I'm really not. But I was thinking about it the other day. It's a guitar to me, and I can't get enough of them. But I think they represent. When I look at a guitar, I tell my wife this because like I can just stare at guitars for so long. She's like, "What are you thinking? Like when you just stare at a guitar?" And I'm like, I used to do this before I ever owned a guitar. I used to just stare at guitars, and it's been, I don't know how long I've been playing, almost 40 years now, and I'm still staring at guitars, like nothing's changed. But what I think for me, it's kind of like when you're, say, 15, and you're gonna get your license soon, and you're just obsessed with the car, like, especially like old cars. Like it's like an old, like an American dream, right? Like, those old classic cars, and like one day you have a car, and what did they really represent? Freedom. I think that's what a guitar to me represented, why I wanted one so bad. It was, I always used to look at it and stare at me like, this is my ticket out. This is what's going to get me out of where I am. This is going to bring me everything that I dream about. And I still have that same feeling when I look at them, and why I want to get another one, because I'm like, I think there's songs in that guitar that need to be written. Woo!
Sometimes guitars have cured writing blocks. I mean, I think you tell a story of going down Ventura Boulevard out in Los Angeles.
Yeah, again, because like that's that whole thing. Like, do guitars have songs in them, or are they just so inspiring sounding that you write songs because of them? There's a lot of writers will talk about that. Like, who knows if you're writing them or they're just living in the guitar and you're pulling them out. But yeah, if I had there was a period where, and I don't think I really had writer's block. Again, it was in that like pressure situation of like there was a deadline and I didn't have enough songs yet. Because I don't think I've actually ever, when I've found out like what writer's block really is, I don't think I've ever really had that. But I just had that pressure of trying to be, and being uninspired, I think is what it was. And I would go down and I would buy a new guitar, and it was also the first time we actually had money to do that. So, those first 4 records, like we didn't really make a lot of money at the beginning because the money takes, even though we sold a bunch of records on All Killer and Fat Lip and In Too Deep were big songs, like we didn't make money for like 3 years after that because it just takes so long for you to get paid from the music business. If you get paid at all. So
some of us are still waiting.
Yeah.
What's funny too is I think one of the other big purchases to just prove, because I know when you're growing up as a fan, to speak maybe for you guys too, it's like you wonder, you see these people in videos and somewhere like, are they really friends? I know they grew up together. I loved reading that you and Cone got like houses or apartments literally right next to each other in is it Toronto or something?
Yeah, we got our first places. We're like, well, clearly we're gonna be neighbors.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's amazing. And then just have to geek out if we do we have any like guitar heads in here that play guitar? Woo! Couple, all right, nice. A handful. You guys actually, I thought this was so compelling for like sort of the music nerds in the house, is when you do a great job of telling stories of those early tours. And one of the things you guys did is you actually, after some show, somebody gave you advice to tune down and get heavier gauges.
Heavier gauge strings, tune half step down, because we were always playing out of tune. And because I play really, really hard, especially when I get on stage. It's like I'm punching the guitar. And I would always come like with bloody knuckles and strings just out of tune, the whole guitar out of tune within 2 songs. And somebody said, play heavier strings, tune down, you'll sound heavier and you'll stay in tune. And so we did. Yeah. And we never looked back.
You still play it still today. It's amazing.
I tried going to lighter strings on this tour on Heaven Hell. I was like, I think I'm a better player now.
What I got a kick out of too, reading about some of those early tours, is something maybe we don't think about as fans is you guys try to search and find your audience back in the day. Of course, circa 2000, 2001. You would do that through hitting the road. And you really found your groove, I guess, on this Mighty Mighty Boss Tones tour. Yeah. And they were an incredibly important band to you guys and almost mentors in a way.
Yeah, it was around the time, it was the record after the Impression That I Get single that they had. So they were like really, really big, and those shows were great. And we never really seen, there's a lot of guys in the band. And also Flogging Molly was the opener on that, really opener. Nobody had ever heard of us. So there's like both bands have just a ton of people on stage, and they both put on these incredible shows. And we were just this kind of like young little scrappy punk rock band that just jumped around. We had trampolines on stage, stuff like that. But we didn't really do a consistent show. You know, we just kind of went up and just played and hoped for the best. And sometimes it was good, sometimes it was a disaster. And we didn't know, we hadn't done a lot of touring. We hadn't done any touring in the US really. And we'd never done really long, extensive touring in all these different cities. And you start to realize, even though you're doing the same songs, the same set, and you have the same vibe, and the crowd looks the same, it's always different. And what you say in one night doesn't always work the next night, and your joke is funny in one place, it's not funny at the other place. And you know, all that kind of stuff you start realizing, and you're watching the Bosstones, and they're just killing it every night. So it was just a good lesson to see, like, oh, like, you know, there's a way to put on a show. You kind of switch it up every night, and you kind of feel the audience. It was just like, it was just interesting to watch. Like, I would see the audience, and I'd see how Dickie would, you know, sort of command the audience, and it was learning lessons. It was cool.
And there's amazing stories that detail all of that in this book. And I gotta ask you, because this is sort of a very important moment, a night in the band's history for a lot of different reasons, and we're here tonight in the shadow of New York City. Is anybody old enough to remember the MTV 20 celebration? One old timer! That was a crazy night because, I mean, just to really, if you are not old enough to remember this, in summer 2001, this band is blowing up, and so much so that MTV is turning 20, and MTV is the biggest thing in the world in 2001. And you guys, I believe, opened that show.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that is the honor of all honors, and you do a great job. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. But I think you meet Tommy Lee that night, and you also meet Paris Hilton that night.
Yes. There were a lot of people that night, but those two were standouts, yeah.
Definitely. And Tommy Lee is sort of a guardian angel when you read the book. He kind of is like, he recurs throughout the book.
I know. Yeah, he does.
What's so special to you about Tommy, just what he's meant to you?
Well, okay, so started with the MTV 20th anniversary. We got asked to do that. We were still relatively unknown. Fat Lip was just starting to kind of do okay, but people didn't know. It was kind of so new that you wouldn't associate the name Sum 41 with that song yet. It was, you know, early days. And we got asked to open the show, and we thought, well, let's do something like we've seen in the past where, you know, it's like the Run DMC Aerosmith would do something together. You know, like some collaboration thing. So we asked MTV, they said, yeah, sure. And we just started kicking around names, and somebody said that Tommy Lee from Motley Crue was going to be there. We're like, well, let's ask him. And he said, fuck yeah. And so once we got him, then we were like, well, let's ask who else? And, you know, Rob Halford from Judas Priest's name got mentioned. We're like, well, let's ask him. He said yes. So we were on the Warped Tour, and we were just thinking, oh man, this and that MTV thing was approaching about a week later, and we were like, well, I guess we gotta like figure out what we're gonna play with these guys. And so we kind of put this medley together, and you know, like you said, it's on YouTube. You can go see it. It's you know, it's like a 6 or 7 minute medley of songs of Sum 41 and Judas Priest and Motley Crue. And we did a Beastie Boys cover, and that was the turning point for us as a band, because everything after that night, even after that performance, everyone knew who we were. Everyone looked at us differently. Everyone was like, "Oh, this band's, they're not going away." Yeah. Nope. And here we are. So that was how I met Tommy, and he's just stayed part of our lives ever since.
Yeah. And then, of course, another big love story in the book, of course, is you and Avril.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about just maybe what you shared, or what maybe you can preview about you and Avril in the book.
Well, I wouldn't even know where to begin, because the truth is that we were together pretty much almost all of my 20s. So, you know, from like 23 to 30, we were together. So it's just, she's in a lot of that whole time period, right? And there's not like a specific, oh, here's the Avril and Deryck chapter. It's like there's just chapters of my life, and she's a big part of a few of those chapters. Like, I don't know how many chapters there are, but I don't even know how many chapters there are in the book. To be honest. I mean, when I wrote stuff, I just wrote, so like, it had to be broken up into chapters because I was like, I'm not stopping for what I think is a chapter. I'm just gonna write and write and write and write and write. And it just kept going. They were like, well, we gotta break it here and make that a chapter.
They had to tell you to stop.
Pretty much.
But that's why I keep harping on this. The book is fantastic, of course, but it's almost like the audiobook is a companion piece because it really does feel like you're hanging out with this guy for 6 hours listening because of how you wrote it, like you're saying, where these characters, it's not just this like sort of here's the Avril chapter or here's the Tommy story. These characters, it's this beautiful sort of like flow to the storytelling, and I don't know if that was your intent or not, but it's really cool.
Like I said, I was just gonna write it as if I was telling you the story, and everything that is in my life is so intertwined with Sum 41. Like there's no day off from Sum 41, just like there's no day off from my life. It's all every day, all day. It's just like I bounce around from different things, like a life experience into Sum 41, into back to a life experience. Like it's just all in the same day,
Yeah. Now, the $1 million question. When this book is a huge success, would you ever option it for a movie about your life? Would you ever like to see that happen?
I guess we have to see how the book goes. I don't know.
I think it'd make it amazing. You had to be
Again, you're asking the guy who thought his life was too boring. I think I should have a movie.
That person's crazy.
I'd
to you
see it.
right now. Just wait till you read this book, and just remember that tonight Deryck said he thought his life was boring. This is one of the most incredible life stories. And on that note, Deryck, I've been told we're going to actually open it up to some fan questions.
Okay.
So, I got Todd. Guys, round of applause for Todd.